Morning, everyone. We're going to give it a few moments for all the attendees to join. We'll be ready to start in a few moments. Good morning, all. Would like to welcome everyone to today's session on the tree removal and replacement ordinance for New Jersey. I'm Christina Schwartz. I'm the Executive Director for the New Jersey Administration of Planning and Zoning. And I'm also the Land Use Director in Reddington Township, Hunterdon County. I'm excited to welcome you today for session 1 in a 3-part series. Before we get started, I'd like to cover a few general administrative items for today's session. For credit, this session is pre-approved for continuing ed credit by NJUCF and Rutgers CGS in Planning and Zoning. If you're attending for CE credit, please make sure to remain on for the full session to fulfill your credit requirement. For submitting questions, during today's session, we have the Q&A function enabled on Zoom. So if you have a question as our presenters are going along, you can submit it through the Q&A and we will address it as time permits at the end. If there's questions we can't address, we may follow up with the session attendees after this session, or we might incorporate those comments into the other sessions in this series. Lastly, be aware that the slide deck will be emailed to all attendees following this session. So as you're listening today, don't worry about writing down links or other resources. We'll send out the presentation, and you'll also be able to access the links that are embedded in those slides. We already had a question on registration for each session. There'll be a registration link for each session. So some of it's a 3-part series. All 3 parts may not be applicable to you or your job role. So you can just register for the sessions you're interested in. The registration information for the following sessions will be released shortly. So now that we have those administrative items out of the way, I would like to begin by introducing today's panel. So first, we have with us, get to the right slide here. All right, so for session 1, our panel. Start first with James Clavelli. James is a professional planner and AICP. James is a New Jersey-based urban planning consultant with the firm Clark Caton Hitz. James obtained his master's in city and regional planning degree with a concentration in land use planning from the Rutgers Bloustein School for Planning and Public Policy. James became a planner because he felt it was a practical profession with real-life impact on the lives of people and the communities they live in. And it allows him to do what he loves most, which is work with other people. James is experienced in many aspects of land use planning, and that includes drafting master plan elements, redevelopment studies, affordable housing plans, and site plan review. Along with many of the municipalities represented on today's call, I've had the privilege of working directly with James and his firm, and have really benefited from their high level of service and great attention to detail. Next, we have Neil Hendrickson, PhD. Neil is an industry expert with over 30 years of experience as a practicing arborist. He obtained his master's in forest science from the University of New Hampshire and followed that with a PhD in silviculture and Forestry from Yale University. While Neil is currently retired from Bartlett Tree Research Laboratory, he maintains a very full schedule with his volunteer efforts in both his local community and around the state, and he still participates in speaking engagements and conferences around the country. Neil is a certified arborist, NJ certified tree expert, and a member of the Society of American Foresters. And Neil is with us today. He is currently the president of the New Jersey Shade Tree Federation. Neil's passion for the profession is evident to anyone who has ever had the privilege of working with him or just speaking with him on what he loves most. Lastly, we have Christina Corrieva. Christina is an environmental specialist with the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. She is currently part of New Jersey DEP's Stormwater Permitting and Water Quality Management Division. Christina graduated from Stockton University with a Master of Science in Environmental Science. Following graduation, Christina spent a year with the NJ Watershed Ambassadors Program through AmeriCorps and the NJDEP. There she worked in freshwater streams with the Great Egg Harbor Watershed. Christina has spent the last 6 years as an environmental specialist with the Bureau of NJDEP's Stormwater Permitting and Water Quality Management Division, and she specifically works in the MS4 Stormwater Permitting Unit. She has a wealth of knowledge, and we are very excited to have her with us today. So I wanted to start off on how this collaboration became to be with New Jersey Association of Planning and Zoning Administrators and the NJ Shade Tree Federation. Neil and I have the privilege of working together in Reddington Township, and following the League of Municipalities this year, this past November in 2023, both our group and NJ Shade Tree were getting lots of questions about this ordinance requirement and really interested in hearing about what they had to do to comply, and also looking for guidance in developing an ordinance that'd be appropriate to their community. So we decided it'd be a great opportunity to bring our groups together. So I want to take this opportunity to briefly introduce NJAPZA and what we do for those of you that are joining us more in the tree vein this morning. NJAPZA is a professional organization. We offer educational opportunities and career development for those working in municipal land use offices. So that could be zoning officials, code enforcement, some planners and engineers, and also the land use board secretary, so the planning board and zoning board of adjustment. And we offer webinars, credit opportunities, in-person events, networking, and we have some our contact information here at the bottom of the screen if you're interested in learning more. So the other part of a collaboration is the New Jersey Shade Tree Federation. I'd like to hand it over to Neil to give us a little information about what they do.
Good morning. So the New Jersey Shade Tree Federation, as you see on the screen, it's coming up. We are coming up on our 100th anniversary. So this year's conference in October will be our 99th, and next year should be a big one. Not that this one won't be at 100 years. So as you see, the things we do is we put on an annual conference. This year it'll be in Atlantic City. And it's our primary audience. We target shade tree commissions and municipalities. Like the people you probably have on the call today. But about half the people that show up are people like arborists who are looking for CEUs and education. So we expanded from the annual conference to do a quarterly, what we are calling tree talks, where we have a Zoom call like this in the evening and create a topic that we have gotten a lot of feedback about that people want to know more about. We put that up, we guide the discussion and provide answers when needed, but we basically let our constituents discuss things, and many interesting answers and possibilities have come out of that. So that's been a big hit for us. We also distribute literature on a variety of topics. We are street trees for New Jersey streets, which is very popular, New Jersey laws regarding trees, New Jersey soils, etc., and what not to do, like don't overmulch and things like that. And last, what we are there to do is there's a lot of expertise on our board. So when people email or call those numbers you see or email address, then they have an opportunity to get their questions answered, because if we don't have an immediate answer, we have the resources to find them. So really, we are there to answer questions and service anyone interested in trees, municipalities or individuals. And that's what we do. You're muted, Christina.
Thank you, Neil. Like we mentioned, these slides will be available. So if you want to check out some of these additional resources, you'll have the slides to check that out and take advantage of some of the help that NJ Shade Tree has to offer. I'd like to go over the session outline for today. Like we've mentioned, this is a 3-part series. So session 1 will really be focusing on the NJDEP's model tree ordinance, the requirement to have that ordinance in place. We're also going to talk about, what that ordinance is and what it isn't, clarify anything there, your options to comply with this requirement, how you'll be submitting your ordinance to the DEP, and actions required by the municipalities to comply with this requirement. So we hope you come away today with an understanding of the requirement, why it became part of the MS4 permit. And in session 2, we'll get into more detail of how you can design an ordinance that's appropriate for your community and really helps your residents and your community type. So now to get us started, I'd like to hand it over to Christina from the DEP.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So just to get started, we're going to talk about the tree removal replacement ordinance, the requirement. So what is this? This is going to be a requirement in the Tier A MS4 permit, which we'll go a little bit into in the next slide. This is going to be to adopt and enforce an ordinance to control tree removal and replacement to reduce stormwater runoff and pollutants, and then to also promote infiltration of rainwater into the soil. And this will need to be adopted by all municipalities by May 1st, 2024, which leads right into who does it apply to. So all 557 Tier A municipalities, and that would include any of the reassigned Tier B municipalities, any of the 101 that were reassigned a year or two ago. So basically every municipality in the state. And then we'll talk a little bit about the Tier A permit for anybody that's not familiar. And that is our response to US EPA's Phase 2 rules. It's a general permit, stormwater permit, that authorizes the discharge of stormwater from small municipal separate storm sewer systems. And then, like I said, it was in response to US EPA's Phase 2 rules, and then it's used to address stormwater quality issues related to both new and existing development. All right, so a little bit of why our unit put a tree removal replacement ordinance to the MS4 Tier A permit. First, you have to understand a little bit the important roles that trees have in stormwater management. Some of these include, and I know some of the panel members will go in more depth in the next couple of slides, but just to touch a little bit, we have the reduction in rainfall energy. They promote improved infiltration, uptake of pollutants, erosion control, and then some heat effects in urban areas. You can see the map on the right here is what we use a lot of the times to discuss TMDLs and impairments, and this is basically water quality throughout the state. As you can see, a portion of every community throughout the state has a water quality, either TMDL or an impairment. Some of these parameters include nutrients, TSS, all of which can be mitigated with runoff and things of that nature. So, the important roles of trees in stormwater management. Also, we had a lot of feedback from permit outreach sessions leading up to our renewal. We had a lot of municipalities already have tree ordinances. We had a couple of stakeholder groups that requested some changes to have a uniform model put out there. And then we've also had some feedback from other department groups, New Jersey Forestry.
Hello,
Thank you,
everybody.
Christina.
Oh,
And now I'd like to hand it over to James to talk to us more about how trees make communities more resilient.
so as a planner in New Jersey and a consultant planner, I'm able to work in several different municipalities with different contexts. So urban to suburban to rural, small towns and larger ones. And in all of these communities, as New Jersey is a wet state that deals with a lot of precipitation, which has increased over time, trees are one of the tools that we have that can help us deal with stormwater and flooding. So I don't want to cover too much of what Christina did on the last slide, but trees help us to slow down water, right? By them being there and having a mature tree with a tree canopy or tree cover, rain hits that first, some water lands there and slows it down from actually going to the ground. Leaf litter, the leaves that fall off the trees, add nutrients to water runoff. Tree roots stabilize the soil. We're going to see an excellent picture of that later on in the presentation that really shows how a lack of trees can make stable, not to make soil less stable. Tree roots and leaf litter help with infiltration, so help water be absorbed into the ground. And over time, the trees that you have absorb water, right? So in the middle of a flood event, a tree is not going to absorb water like a giant vacuum, but over time, it does help to absorb that excess water from storm events. Planting trees won't save communities from floods, stormwater, or erosion, but removing trees makes our communities less resilient and less able to deal with the impacts of excess water. So the hope with the model ordinance is to reduce the amount of trees being removed that don't have to be removed, and if they are removed, that we replace them so we don't lose that valuable resource. Trees are one measure in a basket of tools to reduce the negative impacts of storm events. So along with engineering interventions and things like that. And trees also, as was covered by Christina in the previous slide, have a number of other benefits. So the hope is to retain as many of them as possible.
And just because I'm the arborist in the group, there are many more benefits, as you probably know. The cooling of the air effect and the evapotranspiration, how trees not only intercept moisture, but cool the atmosphere by evapotranspiration, filtering pollutants. And in a world that we now live in, they are one of the answers to sequester carbon and mitigate climate change to a small extent. It's well established that where people have trees around their homes, they reduce their need for air conditioning because of the shade. There are data, research that shows that even, for example, a person recuperating in a hospital room with a tree outside the window recuperates faster. Yes, there's actually a study on that. And the other part is we are learning about urban biodiversity, which we will discuss. Don't plant monocultures, as we've seen with ash trees. Ash trees were a major major species to be planted after elms died. And of course, that all they are all now dead or treated. The only two kinds. So, and last, every single tree, and again, there are data on this, produces about somewhere between about 7% of property value increase. And in general, if a well-landscaped yard can have property values go up by about 20%. So there are a lot of reasons, and the way we describe it in our own township is the character of the township. You take trees down or watch trees that were a lot of trees in town that were taken down, it completely changes the character of your community. And it's also been learned that bigger trees, obviously, because they sequester more carbon, have a lot greater value. And when people take down big trees these days, they tend not to replace them with big shade trees, but rather ornamental trees that flower. So I think the topic we're after is really a no net loss. Even if we don't express it as such, we're trying to maintain it. And that's the point that James and Christina both alluded to. So that's what I wanted to say about these. There are articles that you see there that will circulate to you. You can get the article on this if you want to look at the other benefits of trees. Oh, And there are tools that have been developed over many years. One is called iTree, and this one, as you see, called MyTree. You can look at individual trees. You can look at all the trees in your community. There are very broad equations and algorithms to give you a rough idea of what the benefits of your trees. Obviously, it'll vary by species and climate and all of this. But the idea being that you can actually quantify, for the purposes of going before boards and such, the value of the trees, both in, for example, carbon sequestered oxygen produced, and actual monetary value. And that comes from what's called iTree. If you go there or look at this website, which you will be able to get when this is sent to you, you'll see those even for individual trees in your yard. So there's been a lot of effort to quantify the benefits of trees too. Once again, it's approximate, but it does get you somewhere to explain to people the true value of trees in a number of categories.
Okay. And I know we're going to have folks here from communities that range from urban areas, densely populated cities, to suburban areas and rural areas. And I like these two images because they give you a sense of a community without trees and a community with trees. Cartoons are for kids, but they resonate with adults too, because they're easy to understand. So when you look at this community here, you see on the bottom a town that doesn't have any trees, right? So you see kind of a dirty, polluted stream in the back. You see a school, you see some homes, you see some larger buildings. And then when you add the trees, you get the aesthetic benefit and all the benefits that Neil spoke to just a moment ago. But you can also see the difference in how they impact different land use types, right? For example, when we think about a parking lot that doesn't have any trees, it's just a giant impervious field. One of my colleagues refers to it as basically a desert in the middle of a populated area. But when you add trees to it, you get those benefits that we discussed earlier. So the ability to slow down rainwater during an event, to absorb excess water, and all of those things. You can think of the same in a playground, right? I grew up in an urban area, playgrounds that sometimes didn't have trees. They look very different. And also, again, during storm events or rain events are impacted negatively, but trees help to mitigate some of those issues. And the same goes to home and yards. On top of all the benefits Neil spoke to as regards to value, mental and physical health, they do help in those areas as well. And so in my role as a planner and someone who does development review, this is something that we certainly look for. If there's an ordinance and it's a requirement, then it's a requirement, and we bring that up during the review process. If it's not a requirement and there's no ordinance, we might bring it up as a suggestion to say this would be beneficial, to which the board may ask for it as a condition, and the developer or applicant may choose to add those. And we always find that to be a benefit. These also help with other natural features and utility features as well. So when you have a stream corridor that's been clear cut and doesn't have trees, shrubs, plants, things like that, water rushes into it much faster, right? Which can raise the water level and cause flooding issues. It also will bring in some of those pollutants, whether it's from other impervious surfaces or other areas, and bring them into those waterways. But by planting these stream corridors, you're able to slow that process down. You're able to help filter out some of that water and some of those pollutants, so that when the rainfall or excess water gets to the stream, it's a little bit cleaner and happens a little bit more slowly. And the same applies to sewer and stormwater systems. Right? So the community I live in during Hurricane Ida, it was our sewer system that clogged, which had an impact on our stormwater system as well. And again, we're a well-planted community, but by adding in these abilities to arrest water, to slow down water, you hope to prevent those things from happening during major storm events. And so they do help to keep some of that excess water from rushing into our sewer and stormwater systems as well.
Okay, so now that we have talked a little bit about the importance of trees and their benefits of stormwater management, I'll talk a little bit about how the department developed our model stormwater tree removal and replacement ordinance. So first we reviewed existing ordinances within the state and also from other states. We also reviewed the current existing guidelines from the state and federal programs. We worked with the department's urban forestry program. And then we ultimately developed a model, and I want to stress this, that incorporated flexibility. And I'll say it first now, and we'll talk about it in a little bit. The current department model does not need to be adopted word for word. There's a lot of different sections in there, and it's basically as a template and a tool for municipalities to use, not to be adopted word for word. And then we also, during that time that we had drafted it, we provided 2 public draft periods. So the first one, the comments that came back, we had over 200 comments. We addressed a lot of those issues, and then we put it out for comment again. And then that resulted in us issuing the final. And I believe we're going to go into what is in the tree removal replacement model ordinance. So the department's model ordinance, it will allow for the continued use of any existing forestry programs, as well as any already previously adopted tree ordinances. There's language for optional application process. It also outlines requirements for tree removal and replacement. So that goes into the types of trees to be removed, the location of the removal, guidelines for replacing trees, some replacement alternatives. There's exemptions in there for replacement requirements, and then some examples of enforcement of the ordinance, and then penalties. All right, and then I believe.
Right now you spoke to this previously, Christina, but we just wanted to stress here that unlike a lot of the other model ordinances that municipalities may be used to dealing with, this one does not have to be adopted as is. The DEP is offering a lot of flexibility with the municipalities to comply with that requirement.
And I can speak on that flexibility. I wanted to mention that the permit itself requires municipalities to adopt a tree removal replacement ordinance. Our model is there for guidance. I want to stress that we're looking for ordinances that address both removal and replacement. Also, it can't exclude any areas of the municipality. So it can't exclude private or public areas. And I also want to offer up, I think we're going to talk about it in a few slides, but we're willing to review any ordinances that are out there already, or if you're drafting one and you're unsure if they're going to meet the permit requirements, our group is willing to review those for you.
James, we have you muted.
Sorry about that. You have 3 separate options to comply. So the first is to adopt the model ordinance as is, and just kind of filling in the blanks in relation to the variable elements. 2, if you are a municipality that has an existing ordinance that's accredited with the New Jersey Urban and Community Forestry Program, you may continue to utilize those regulations. So if the municipality has one, is content with that, there's no need to make a change. And then 3rd, you can, there is, as was stated earlier, there's a lot of flexibility, and you can develop an ordinance that is unique to your community. And we're going to speak more to that in session 2, how you may build an ordinance in that manner.
And this slide just highlights option number 2 that James talked about in session number 2. We're hoping to bring on somebody directly from New Jersey Urban Community Forestry to speak to the group more specifically about the programs that they have available, how you become accredited with them, and some of those requirements. In the beginning of the NJDEP model ordinance, there's some of these links, and we've included them here as well to check if your municipality is currently accredited. There's a link there. And then also in this presentation, we have a link to the NJDEP model ordinance. It will bring you right to the Word and the PDF versions. So that's included later on in the presentation for all of you to be able to view and review with your municipalities.
All right, and then I can go over how you are going to submit these ordinances. So like I said, these are due May 1st, 2024 to be submitted to the department. Typically, and I believe some of us are not, engineers with the municipality. I heard that we're tree people here. So you would work with the municipal stormwater program coordinator, who is our point of contact with our unit. They would go about submitting that to our program by the deadline. And then, like I said before, if you already have a tree ordinance, you're welcome to reach out to us to see if that we'll review it and make any recommendations if it doesn't meet the requirements of the permit. It's not required to get it approved by us before submitting. It's just an option if you'd like.
Yeah, and really the point that we learned from experience, especially people coming to question at the League of Municipalities, we know that the Pine Barrens is different from Sussex County, and Essex County is different from Hunterdon County. And so the real trick is to take this model and work towards deciding what's best for your municipality. It's going to vary greatly. For some people don't have street trees. If they're rural, they might not have a sidewalk in anywhere in their municipality. So it's very important that this be done unique to each municipality. Some want to try to achieve a zero loss, no net loss, and others they would like to see maximum development, and some want warehouses and are willing to clear trees, and others want no warehouses and no tree clearing. So that all can be put in an ordinance. So that's really the focus of where we'll go after this.
Right, and I did see some questions in the Q&A related to, for example, what if you have a lot of farmland in your community? That's something I know Neil knows quite a bit about. It would look very different. There are also some exceptions in the model ordinance. For example, a tree farm or nursery would not have to abide by the same requirements, right? Because by its nature, that use will remove a tree to sell it, bring it to another site. And so there are some practical exemptions included as well. And again, you would want to design this so that it was specific to the way your community operates. An urban area may want to lean more on collecting fees, right? And then redirect that to beautifying a particular avenue, right? Or putting street trees in certain urban parks, or redirecting those funds to areas that require street trees or for any number of reasons, rather than putting them on, for example, an urban lot, which might not be large enough to or make sense to have a tree go there, right? Because it may not grow to its maturity in that area. So again, when we discuss that in session 2, we'll talk more about how that might relate to a specific type of community and the differences between those communities.
And I see a question about, can we change the replacement tree requirement if someone has a property that is small but removing a tree with a large diameter? Truth is, this is exactly the sort of thing over which you have control. A perfect example, in the municipality in which I live, someone was afraid of a big tree for, well, honestly, as an arborist, no reason, and removed it. So the ordinance you can draft, you might call that an historic tree, a legacy tree, a feature tree. There's any number of names you can use. But if it's a large enough diameter, you can compare it to, for example, the largest tree of that species in the state, which is what I did. And that tree that was removed was 3/4 of the size of the state champion. But it made the homeowner nervous. So in the future, one could put it in your ordinance that if a tree is large, and you can certainly specify it, providing you can get approval from all your ruling bodies, you could charge as much as you want as a disincentive to remove that tree. So sure, go ahead and remove it, but it'll cost, and you might charge $500, you might charge $5,000. depending on your community. And you can also vary the number of trees that you ask be replaced. It could be 1 to 1, or it could be 5 to 1. And if people don't have room on a small lot, as you described, as the questioner describes, you can ask them to make a donation to your, or require them to make a donation to your tree fund so that that tree can be replaced and effectively no net loss, and ensure that that no net loss happens by planting them somewhere else suitable in your municipality. So there is a lot of flexibility, and that's where we're going with this.
And I think one of the most kind of practical aspects of the model ordinance is it makes a distinction for hazard trees and it defines hazard trees. So Neil mentioned someone who was worried about a tree that they should not have been worried about. But what this ordinance does is it specifies if you do have a tree that is likely to fall down, right? And I've actually been in a house where that has happened, and it could be very scary. You removing that, you're not fined or penalized in any way. If a tree is dead or dying, is diseased, or is likely to cause damage to people or property or anything like that, hazard trees are exempt from any of these requirements, and I think that's an important thing for us to underscore. Though bringing in an expert, somebody like Neil, to say, yes, this is a hazard tree, or no, it isn't, helps us to kind of say, a fee is required here, it's not required here. And hopefully we don't remove any legacy trees if we don't have to.
Yeah, and what James brings up is also something important, is what kind of an expert do you require? There are several categories of expertise, and there is a slide coming up where we'll show you that. But there's several categories of expertise. What James referred to as hazard trees, well, for example, there is a qualification called exactly that, the tree risk assessment qualification. And personally, when I recommend to anyone who they speak to, that would be the qualification I would request that most municipalities get. Have someone with that, because most trees are taken down because most people, including most arborists, don't know enough about the context in which that tree is growing, what decay in it might mean, what other defects it might mean. And most people's reaction, first and foremost, is to take down the tree. And we have learned in the arboricultural industry over the last couple of decades at least, is that many trees, most, don't have to come down. So the idea of having someone properly licensed, and in fact, we don't call trees in the profession hazard trees. We call them high risk or low risk, for example. And that way it allows us to categorize them much more accurately, and by actually what's wrong with them. And also because we are in a litigious industry, and when you do follow what is called this TRAC, Tree Risk Assessment Qualification Protocol, you're much more likely to have a very convincing case that you did your due diligence if it goes to court. And you're much more likely to be looked upon more favorably in a court. So we'll get more to this about what that is in a couple of slides, but it is, if you get an expert, be sure you get a true expert. We'll talk more about that.
Thanks, Neil. And in session 3 of this series, we're going to talk about implementing this at municipal level. So having a permit process that is part of the model ordinance, and something that Christina mentioned is optional, but many municipalities will take advantage of that and put a permit process in place for removal, and then how they're going to track and count replacement. And also with that is enforcement of your ordinance. So I'm lucky enough to work with Neil in my municipality, but bringing the right people on board to do site inspections, to confirm these hazard trees, to protect these heritage trees. There's a lot of aspects to this. So we hope to guide you, very specifically in session 3 on that, of getting the right people on your bus and your municipality to make this work for you and be a process that benefits your community and your residents. And education is a huge part of that I know we're going to go into a little more in this session. Looking at the chat, I see we have a bunch of questions on the deadline. So let me just go to Christina's next slide here and we'll talk
And while
about
you're
that.
doing that, I'll just mention that somebody asked for the dates of our conference. It'll be next October 17th and 18th, if I'm not mistaken. If I am, I'll correct it. And since I'm a tree person, what is MS4? Yeah, we never said municipal, separate, stormwater. Uh-oh, I've forgotten the last S.
Storm sewer system.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, separate storm sewer system. So that for that answer. And yes, we'll be in Atlantic City at Harrah's October 17th and 18th. Okay, sorry.
All right, so Christina, this slide has some of the NJDEP contact information that you provided and how folks can get in touch with your group. We have a bunch of questions coming in about the May 1st deadline that they're seeing for this ordinance to be adopted and enforced. Can you speak to that and maybe also touch about municipalities that are continuing to work towards that?
Yeah, of course. So originally the MS4 Tier A permit that applies to all municipalities went into effect January 1st, 2023. At that time period, we didn't have our model template public at the time. It was still out for review and everything. We didn't come out with that until June. And the permit at that time required these to be adopted and enforced by the end of 2023, which we have modded the permit to introduce 6 more months so that now they'll be due May 1st. So the permit requirement is to adopt and enforce by this deadline, this permit, a tree removal and replacement permit. If there's issues in that, you're welcome to reach out to us and we can work with you to see what's going to happen. Beyond that, I guess I can speak to any kind of like penalties from our group that would come into place if that deadline's not met. We have an enforcement sister bureau that does inspections. We go out and audit towns. So we're really looking for, that May 1st kind of deadline to get all of these in and submitted to us. But if anybody's having issues or, they're not understanding the guidance, we're definitely willing to work with them.
And as we'll get into in another slide, Christina, the adoption process in a municipality takes some time, and a lot of the attendees here today are coming up with some really great questions that they need to go back to their municipalities, get with the right groups. Maybe it's their environmental commission, their planning board, the municipal officials that might be involved in this permitting process to really put something that's going to be a success forward. So if they're still working through that or in the midst of the adoption process, should they reach out to their case manager, provide what they're doing so far, to not maybe rush something through to hit May 1st versus really check all the boxes and come up with something comprehensive?
Correct.
Okay,
I would
so
also say as someone who works with governing bodies and boards, because I saw a question about what if somebody doesn't adopt it, and that's a great question. These are independent bodies that they have that is their power to adopt an ordinance or not adopt an ordinance. And as someone who may be concerned or whose role it is to enforce or help to implement these things, just speaking to the facts on the ground, right? Everyone who's lived in New Jersey in the last 10 or 20 years has experienced severe storm events and issues with flooding or knows of communities that have, and just emphasizing the importance of some of these measures and talking about how trees, compared to other measures, are relatively affordable, and they also provide a number of benefits. And so I think there's a lot of concern, right, for governing bodies or other groups when it's imposing a fee or something like that. And as a planner and a professional in the field, it's just to stick to the facts. What are the benefits? what do they do, and what does removing them do, and why we're trying to stop that. So those are the things I would focus on, and definitely be in communication with those case managers. These things take time. There are statutory requirements for ordinance adoption that mean these things can't happen overnight. They won't happen overnight, and we'll get into that a little bit. But I just wanted to emphasize that point, and stick to the facts. And I think people have enough experience in our state to understand what the negative impact to water and things like that can be.
And just briefly, to go back to our conference, for example, is one of the questions that we get is how old is it? When is a tree too old? And so one of the talks I've arranged for this October is there is what's called a functional life of a tree in a landscape and a biological life. If a tree could live 200 years in the woods, if we get several decades out of it in an urban landscape. And so we'll discuss this here somewhat, but much more so in much more depth in a conference. The average life of an urban street tree is about 7 years based on the last data I remember. So ensuring that your trees do what they're supposed to do, especially in this world of climate change where carbon sequestration becomes much more important. So we'll jump into things like native versus non-native because there are no trees native to city streets. We'll jump into that, and there's all those kinds of topics that we'll just touch on here, but we'll go into more depth at our conference. So a small plug for our conference, but why we do it is to give folks more education on making informed decisions for their municipalities.
Thanks, Neil. Some other questions just on how this is going to work procedurally, Christina. Going back to the minimum standards that this ordinance needs to address. Somebody had a question about, does it has to apply to all areas of the municipality? Can you expand upon that? And is the municipality itself exempt, or the Department of Public Works for municipality, or do they all have to comply with this requirement?
So like you said, minimum standards for this requirement for the MS4 permit is going to be that it's all areas of the municipality. And I believe that would include any DPW work, so any municipal properties, unless it falls under that exemptions that we talked about. So our model and our template defines what a hazard tree or exemptions could be. And I've seen a lot of municipal ordinances already that have, exemptions like Christmas tree farms, things of that nature. Anything that obstructs views of traffic signals, if there's been a natural disaster, a storm, anything that's, causing a public safety hazard, are welcome. They are completely exempt from any of these ordinances. So those kind of exemptions and hazard trees can be defined to fit a community's needs. We have, kind of an example in our model. And then I think there was another question about back to the minimum standards. Yeah, so we're truly just looking for the ordinance to address removal and replacement. And that's why, we're grateful for these types of seminars to get everybody thinking a little bit more uniquely for their municipality. And while we are writing the requirements, it's great to have some guidance from you guys to give our municipalities some more detailed information. So we appreciate that.
And in the vein of guidance here, Neil, there's some questions about if there's some resources that can be developed for communities to use to communicate the importance of trees and these requirements to business owners, to residents. And I know in our work together at the municipal level, that's really something that you excel at, that speaking with the homeowners that are thinking they need to, cut down a whole stand of trees to, keep the backyard safe or to put in a pool, a deck, whatever it is. You really do a good job educating them, on what really is a hazard maybe in their yard, and some other options for them, maybe trees they think are dead and declining that in fact are not, or can be addressed with some simple measures. I'll let you speak to that portion of your work with that, but perhaps that is something we can look to do, is provide just some standard resources
Right.
to be used at the municipal level, because especially those that are public facing, you're going to get a lot of pushback from business owners or residents that are looking to do some tree removal on their property and not understanding the real importance of the replacement or paying into the tree escrow to the no net loss.
Sure. I just made a note to myself to go into more depth into what we call our tree risk assessment protocol for just those reasons. And in fact, what Christina is alluding to, yes, I go see a number of homeowners who are typically afraid of their trees and don't know anything about trees, and so their first reaction is to remove them. But most are susceptible to having a common sense scientific explanation as, actually, no, there's a reason this tree has stood here through many storms over many decades. And so that idea, which I mentioned briefly, is this tree risk assessment. I'll go into that more in another session so you have the tools, because although it sounds like a profoundly important, well, profoundly hard to get qualification, it is not. It's common sense. And tree risk assessment for trees uses the same protocols that tree risk assessment for government agencies or actuaries use. It's just a matter of assessing the risk and assessing the consequences. So I will address that in a future session in a little more depth. But yes, this has, since the word hazard has come up several times, I think it's important that we go into it in more depth so that you have better tools to work with for making those judgments in your own municipality. So we'll definitely address that more. And if you have questions, you can certainly send them in the Q&A, and I will attempt to answer them on that subject in particular.
Thank you. And I see some questions again about exemptions and what can be exempt. There's some guidance in the model, which I just shared the link to everyone in the chat here. So you can have a look at that, but you're able to set reasonable exemptions within your ordinance. That's one of the flexibilities permitted here. I know our township has an exemption for utility work and, work required in the right of way for utility lines, things like that. And then also we have a buffer zone around existing homes for some simple improvements, like if you want to do a deck or put in a generator or whatever it might be, and then they'll show us, in part of their permit process for that. So we had a question, specifically about building permits. We'll talk about that in session 3, mostly of your permit process. Well, you're going to get a lot of the tree removal that's taking place, especially on private property that's not being, heard in front of one of the land use boards when they apply for building permits. So it's important that you incorporate a question there or some kind of plan of, hey, you're putting in this big pool, are you taking down any trees? And then see if your ordinance is going to be requiring some replacement and things for that. So we hope to guide you more on that in session 3 of how is this working with your residents and maybe even for your board applications at your municipal level. We're just trying to go through some of the questions now. And
I see one question about, for example, there was a question about, is it okay to take down Norway maples and such, Atlantis? There's a long list of species that we'd rather not have. And the answer is that is what both Christinas have alluded to, and James, which is you have a lot of flexibility. If you have someone that says, no, these trees should come down, but if it's the only tree in your yard and it is valuable to you, hopefully you have the flexibility, you create the flexibility to be sensible about it. If your Norway maple is healthy, not killing itself, and we can talk about individual species if you like, but if it's healthy and doing okay and sequestering carbon and providing shade and cooling the air and giving you air conditioning, maybe it's not a good idea to remove it. So even though it's considered highly invasive, undesirable, and in many places it can't be sold in the nursery. So things like that. In Atlantis, it's the same story. If you live in an urban area and it's the only tree in your yard or on your block, maybe it's not one you want to remove. Although you might get used to the lanternflies that love it. But so that's entirely up to those of you who write your ordinances. That's why we're doing this, so that you can see that you have enormous flexibility. Others have said it, and we'll re-emphasize it. At the end of the model ordinance is trees you can plant and trees you shouldn't. That's very dynamic, and if you have an expert or experts, you can certainly decide whether to use that or use your judgment on a per property basis. That is the beauty of the ordinance. You make it to suit your community.
Yes, and a lot of the questions on appropriate plantings, some native species to include. We hope to provide additional guidance, with the help from Neil and the folks at NJ Shade Tree in session 2, when you develop an ordinance that is specific to your community. Before we address more questions, I just want to move on to our next point here on what is required at the municipal level, to adopt this ordinance. So I want to hand it back over to James to finish this point out, and then we'll get back to the Q&A. So if you have additional questions, please feel free to put it there.
And I did see a lot of questions in the chat about, if we adopt it on this date in April, and with the 20-day delay and the second reading, I'm there with you. My suggestion would be to just stay in communication with your case manager and just let them know that you're going through that process. I think everyone understands that ordinance adoption in New Jersey is not something that happens overnight, and we are fairly close to that deadline already. So I would just, again, communicate with them. So a lot of folks on this call may know this. The adoption of a municipal ordinance requires 2 readings by the governing body, separated by at least 10 days. So right there, that creates a time lapse, right? You have to wait until your next governing body meeting. That's assuming that the ordinance is drafted in some form. Governing bodies may request changes or require changes, and that process can sometimes take some time. But at the very least, it has to be separated by 10 days. And as indicated in the chat, it takes 20 days for an adopted ordinance to go into effect. This process, there's an extra step if this ordinance is going to be part of your zoning ordinance. In that case, the planning board will also need to review the ordinance for consistency with the municipal master plan. And this can originate with the governing body or with the planning board. And just to speak to that, I work in some communities where the tree removal and replacement ordinance is within the zoning ordinance. The advantage there is, as a planner and a board planner for zoning boards and planning boards, when I review plans, I can review them against the tree removal and replacement ordinances. So it adds an extra layer to making sure we're picking that up. And that could be, in some instances, that could be a pretty dramatic change, because there's a large lot that comes in with a large development, and you may be removing quite a few trees. And so there's some steps there, and always having that extra layer of review is helpful. When it isn't in the zoning ordinance, that's not something that your board planner or board engineer may be able to pick up on then in those instances. So just something to keep in mind. I've seen it happen both ways. When it happens in a town where it's not in the zoning ordinance and we get discussions about it at the board level, something I would have to say is, it's not in the zoning ordinance. So as such, I can't include it in my report, because the board may not have any ability to enforce it or deal with it in that sense. So just something to keep in mind. And again, every community will handle that how they think is most appropriate.
Thank you, James. Yep. Again, we're seeing a lot of questions. Those looking are going through the process or working on this, or realizing now, hey, there might be some other groups in my township that I need to, or departments that I need to loop in to cover all the bases in a tree ordinance we want to develop. So again, some questions on the case managers, Christina, that can be found. We're going to send out the deck. There's a question on that too. You'll have this slide deck. So you will have these links, the case manager list, and that's by county. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So you'll be able to see who your case manager is there. I know in our municipality, it's mostly our engineer that generally works with your group. But then with this ordinance, you might be looping in new folks. So you can use these email addresses that are listed here, and also contact your case manager directly by clicking on that link and seeing who that will be for your municipality based on which county you're in.
There's one question that's easy to, somebody said they were late to the meeting. Does it apply to a municipal or county level? No, this is for municipalities.
Was this for also for county lands too, I would assume, right, Christina?
So currently the counties don't have this in their MS4 permit. It's just a municipal requirement as of now. So the Tier A permit is where it's in. We are updating the highway agency permit, which covers all of the MS4 systems along county roadways and county areas. So that will be updated by the end of this year. We're going to start our pre-draft process pretty soon. So it may follow, some kind of tree. Obviously, it won't be an ordinance that they have to adopt, but it may be a tree removal and replacement management requirement to follow some of these.
One question I see there, is there a definition of tree? For example, diameter, DBH, diameter at breast height of 4 inches or greater. You can define that. You can decide if a tree starts at 4 inches. Many start at 6, but depending on what you have or how important your trees are to you, or et cetera, any criterion, you can decide what constitutes a tree. You can, in your own ordinance, it can be 4, it can be 2, but most, I'd say, it starts around 6. And above that, about setbacks. James and on our planning board, I sit on our planning board, so James and I interact quite a bit about the location plan relative to setback and property line. Yes, you can put this in your ordinance as well. For example, James and I were discussing earlier development application in our township in which a building built out to the limits of the property. We asked them to reduce it so we would have more room for trees. But what they said was, we don't want really to pay for trees, so we'll cram more trees into a smaller area. So what that prompted was to say you also have to have a certain amount of soil volume, excuse me, to support a tree that will become small or medium or large. And that allows you to make sure that you can get the tree to live to its design intent. So if you have a shade tree that has the potential to become 50 feet or taller over 60 years, you have to have a soil volume that will support that. We can talk about that in more depth in the future sessions. But these are all the things you can put in there if you can get the municipal authorities to approve it. It makes a lot of sense because if you just say, well, we're planting 100 trees, and then they plant those same number of trees in a half or a quarter of the area, they're not going to live very long. So once again, you can address these things in your ordinance. You just have to think through the problems. And there are so many ordinances in the state that certainly there are probably 100 anyway that you could use as a template. And you'll begin to see, as Christina with the K said, that's why there's a model. But you can use any number of other townships that are similar to yours. Look at theirs and use them as models and templates, and cut and paste to suit your own township. But that's where we're going with this.
Thank you, Neil. And a lot of questions on enforcement, what would require a permit, homeowner work. That will all be session 3, because as Christina highlighted from the DEP, a lot of flexibility to the townships. You have to regulate removal and replacement, and it has to apply to all areas within the jurisdiction of your municipality. But how you're going to achieve that, if you're going to have a permit process, what your replacement schedule is going to be. That is all up to the municipalities. So we hope to work with this group and come up with a permit process that'll work for you. As James and Neil highlighted, that will vary based on the characteristics of your municipality. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, especially with the staff being different in different municipalities. Some of us already having many roles in our municipalities of who's going to enforce this, who's taking in the permits. You have to come up with a form. All of these things, we hope to get a diverse group together for session 3 of municipal officials to help you kind of walk through how this is working in other municipalities and some things you can maybe take from those, and some examples of permits, enforcement ordinances, and how that works.
We keep emphasizing this about no net loss being a suggestion or mandatory. No, it says it's a goal and very difficult to achieve, but somebody asked if it was mandatory. No, that's the whole point of this. You can decide if it's a goal of your ordinance, and then you design your ordinance to see if you can get there. The same thing for a question above that about pineland regulations versus non-pinelands. It's the same thing. What we've been emphasizing is it's going to vary by your municipality. So stick with us, and we're going to be talking about just these things.
Thanks. And some questions specifically about municipalities that are accredited with NJ Urban and Community Forestry Program. We will be hoping to bring someone on from that group in session 2, or at least provide some guidance on their guidelines. But being accredited with them does not, automatically make you compliant with this requirement. As James highlighted, an action is required from municipality. You do have to adopt something by ordinance. So you may have an established forestry program requirement that you're working on with them, or that's in place. So you have to make sure that addresses the minimum standards of this requirement with the NJDEP, and then make sure that's adopted by ordinance in your municipality. So there's some additional guidance on that requirement and the links to that group in the forward to the model ordinance. The link to that was shared in the chat, but it will also be included in the session slides, so you'll be able to check that out following this presentation.
One question there, is there an exemption for species? That's up to you. For example, we do not require people, we like to know if ash trees are being removed. Why? Because if people want trees down, they'll call them an ash tree. I recently visited a property that had one ash tree and about 25 beautiful large red oaks. The arborist, and I use the term lightly, that came to the property said, no, they're all ash trees and have to come down. So this is one reason to have competence visit your property, competent people visit your property. And once again, in your own ordinance, you can specify, no, ash trees are exempt. Take them down all you want, because unless you treat them regularly, that's the only way to keep them alive. There are only two kinds of ash trees, treated or dead. So you can certainly exempt ash trees. And then hopefully, as we get to the slide, I'll explain the people you might want to have come to your property or your municipality, or be hired as a consultant, so that you get good information.
Christina, do you mind jumping back to that slide just before? There was something I realized in my notes I had forgotten to mention regarding ordinance adoption. So
Sure.
we did cover ordinance adoption, but the point we wanted to mention as well, to compare this to other statewide or model ordinances, and I think the most relevant and kind of recent one is the electric vehicle ordinance. The electric vehicle statewide model ordinance is relevant at every site plan application or every preliminary site plan application anywhere in the state, regardless of whether the municipality adopts the ordinance or not. So I work in one town where they adopted the model ordinance for EV, and I work in several other towns where they did not. But it is my obligation, and is the board's obligation, to make sure that folks meet those requirements, whether that ordinance is adopted by that particular community. The requirement here towards your MS4 Tier A permit is to adopt an ordinance. So an ordinance, the requirement is for it to be adopted. And the point we're trying to make is that can look different from town to town, what that ordinance is like, based on your community and what's important to you and what's, the physical characteristics of your community. But that to meet the requirement, you do have to adopt a ordinance, a tree removal and replacement ordinance. So I realized I didn't make that point, Christina. My apologies.
Well, thanks for revisiting that, James.
There's one question I would answer to somebody asked about a model native tree list. Among the things the Shade Tree Federation can provide you with is an excellent reference called Street Trees for New Jersey Streets. I believe that's the title, or it's close. But you can see that there is an enormous number of trees that have been compiled that are suitable. So if you're curious about that, start there. Contact the Shade Tree Federation. We'll get you that.
And we can provide that. Yeah, we can provide that to all for session 2. I'm assuming we're going to send out some reference material with signups for session 2 to kind of get you, ready and have these materials in front of you of some resources that NJ Shade Tree has and some model ordinances and municipalities ordinances that are, been in place and working well as some examples to you. So we'll make sure to get some of these resources to the full group. Christina, question on... Oh, sorry, go ahead, James, and then we'll pop to a different one for Christina here.
I was going to say there was a question about survival rate requirement. I believe there's a 2-year obligation, right, for the property owner to maintain the plantings once they're in. I saw that because I know that that's a question that comes up. So I'm going to just double check in the ordinance here.
Of course, more than 2 years would be desirable on any tree.
Right. You know what? And I don't see it here. I'm sorry. I will double check and see if I can find that. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So the model ordinance requires that a replacement tree shall be monitored by the applicant for a period of 2 years to ensure their survival and shall be replaced as needed within 12 months. So there is the model ordinance does cover that in terms of, are they just sticking something in the ground and then we're giving them the okay and we move on? But no, there is an obligation for them to maintain that and to monitor it for 2 years.
And along those lines, and this would be a little trickier, you'd really have to be creative with this. But suppose somebody does a development and protects the trees, or so they say, and you're not sure they're well protected and the root zone might be severely compromised, and that tree dies 3 years from now. Are they liable? You can create that. You can, for example, what I do when I visit properties, I take pictures. There's also Google Earth and other ways to get images of whether that tree is healthy and functioning at the time of development. And if subsequently that tree dies and you can make a case that it's the result of development, and of course this could be difficult, especially if it goes legal, but you could say if you kill that tree, and trees do not die from development right away. They sometimes do, but often it takes 10 years. So if you object to the degree of impact on those trees and can put it into your ordinance just enough to serve as a deterrent, enforcement, that's beyond my ability to talk about, but you could certainly put in the ordinance that if it dies subsequently as a result of what we believe to be your actions, you can put it in there that might serve as a deterrent.
And we've certainly experienced that in Reddington, on site inspections and even with homeowner work, especially when a lot of grading is taking place. Yes. And that's the education aspect that, you've really given me a lot of guidance on to work with homeowners, and that, we hope to give additional guidance to the group on in the subsequent sessions. The more information and resources you can provide, the more successful any tree ordinance in any municipality will be.
I also
Okay,
want
so
to, oh, I'm sorry.
to go back
Sorry.
to a question for Christina, if we could. There's something about if they could just make this ordinance apply to street trees.
Oh, yeah. So I believe there was a question, can they apply just to street trees or does it need to include all trees in the township? And I would say all trees in the township. You can definitely define, what a street tree is, shade tree. You can define those and they can have different requirements. But it needs to, encapsulate all trees within the township.
Yeah, this is sort of going into the weeds more than I probably should, but there is the old tragedy of the commons, like air is a free good, so you can pollute it all you want. Trees are part of the your community, and if everybody removed every tree, your community character would change, and it's not in anybody's interest for all the trees to be removed. So how you approach that, again, up to you.
And just putting up the graphic for the subsequent sessions as we're getting some questions on that of the registration is not open yet, but everyone that attended today will specifically get an email. It'll also be posted to NJ Shade Tree, their newsletter, and any social media website. Same thing with the NJAPZA. We'll be advertising that. But everyone who attended today will specifically get an email once registration opens, so you can plan to attend session 2, and then we'll open registration for session 3. So you will have to register for each one individually.
And Christina, did you have a slide about the qualifications of people that they might want to? I seem to remember you having that.
Yes.
I'll just bring it up, give people something to think about. Yeah. So when you write your ordinance, you can certainly specify the level of expertise that you require. So what you see there, licensed tree expert. In New Jersey, we have what we believe to be the strictest and highest level licensing requirement in the country, and that's a licensed tree expert. There are what are called LTCOs, a licensed tree care operator. And that allows someone to take down trees and prune them, but it doesn't allow them to give you the full range of services. So a licensed tree expert is the highest in the state and probably the United States. So just as a plug for that, it's in order to practice arboriculture, to do any tree work in your town, you must have at least a licensed tree care operator certification. And that means once you have that, you can register your company. So if a company is not registered, people like me who care about the highest qualifications and the highest quality of service in our industry, you want to look for that registration number on the vehicle somewhere. Because that'll tell you you have a minimum level of competence. And once, again, I've mentioned this before, because the term hazard tree has come up over and over, and I will go into this at one of the next 2 sessions. The next level of qualification is a tree risk assessment qualification. So if you have trees in your township where the major question is, should it come down? I want it down. People want trees down. You might want to have a consultant or someone, a volunteer within your municipality who has what we call track, because that will make it much more likely you'll have someone who is, it's like a specialist in medicine, someone who is particularly good at assessing the risks and advising you whether trees are probably a good idea to be removed. And again, the word hazard is still prevalent, but it's not in use in our industry. We describe trees by their risk: high risk, low risk. And I was already thinking about how we're going to present this easily so we don't wander off down some alley. I'll explain this quite clearly in one of our future sessions, and you'll see that you don't even have to have the qualification if you think along these lines. You just have to be thinking. So we'll cover that. I just wanted to mention that. So as you're thinking about your ordinances, thinking about who might assist you becomes very important if you don't have the expertise within your own municipality.
Absolutely. And I know Neil and I experienced that, firsthand when we implemented a tree ordinance in our municipality. It really involved many different departments that weren't initially thought about when it was developed. So, I got to learn a lot about trees through Neil, and in our township, our Department of Public Works director is also an arborist, and they've really taught me a lot. And working collaboratively with both of them has really been helpful. And when we consider making any changes, making sure we have all input from all, the stakeholders in the process is really vital. So we'll, address that as well. I just want to reference, still some more questions about the slides. Yes, you'll be getting those. We will also be making the recording available. When exactly I can't answer, but definitely before the next session. So we will have that available. I know some of you would like to share that with other departments or with your town council if they're not aware of this requirement and what needs to happen. There also is a slide in here with a bunch of the links for the resources and groups we mentioned today that you can access. So you'll be able to have that as well.
I see two questions I can answer quickly. One,
sure,
this
ahead,
is
Neil.
a good question. What about a co-owned tree when it should be removed and requires replacement? When I was new to the industry, someone said to me, and I will repeat it for your benefit, shake any tree hard enough and an attorney will fall out of it. So who should decide? Chances are most co-owned trees that become contentious require legal intervention. So that's one. How is a municipality supposed to track removal of trees on private property? We have had this experience where suddenly there were trees and then there were stumps. And then someone said to us, oh, they were all decayed or leaning or rotted. But this person was older, like I am, but forgot to realize that there are Google Earth and things like that, NJMAP2. There are lots of ways to get imagery, and we found that those trees that came down were actually nothing wrong with them. So somebody just needed the work and decided that all the trees had to come down, and there was not a thing wrong with any of them. And then we checked the stumps and could confirm that they were growing well and had no decay. So that's how you can do it. You just yeah, and as I drive around our township, I listen for chippers and chainsaws, and I tend to follow them and look for the registration number, look for the personal protective equipment, hard hats, chaps, ear protection, eye protection. Believe it or not, those are required. If you have people working in your township on your municipal job, for example, and somebody is chipping wood and throws a chip into their eye, which is not an uncommon type of injury, you would not want to be liable. You would want to be sure that you have people who are protecting themselves on your behalf. So there's a lot of those things out there, and which is why you want to have people who are qualified and registered working in your municipality.
Thank you, Neil. And these are all great points and things you may want to consider putting into your ordinance. As Christina mentioned, there's a few things that are going to be required to be in your ordinance to meet the DEP requirements, but to make it work for your township, there might be a lot of other things to consider. I know we have the provision about the license requirements when somebody hires a company to do work on their property. And that's something that they give us as part of their permit. They let us know who is doing the work, their license number, all of that. So we have that on file. And if they plan to use somebody who, is not qualified or licensed to do that work, we can get ahead of it and advise them before the work commences, because we do have a permit process in place. I know Christina highlighted that's an optional requirement, but for townships looking to, track and issue a permit, well, the fact that you have a permit requirement in place is going to be important for you, and you'll want to design that. And the model has, some great language that you can look at, but you can also look to tweak that for what will work for your township. I think we got through a majority of the questions, especially the ones that we can address, in today's session.
And I see questions that we will go into more depth on in the next session. So if it didn't seem like your question was answered, it's not that we're not catching them. We'll probably address them as part of the regular next session.
Yes, and if we couldn't address that today, and it's something we need to loop back with Christina and the folks at the DEP, we will do that and hope to get you guys as many answers as we can to some of these questions that are coming in for today. Some in the administrative vein, things about participants today that are looking for CE credit for that were not pre-approved. From the Zoom invite, you'll have the session description and the presenter bios. For a lot of associations, that is, what would be required to submit to self-report for credit. But if you need something additional, please reach out to me directly. You can do that through the NJAPZA contact, and that will be in one of the slides. And I'll try to give you whatever you might need to seek credit with your licensing authority.
Couple of quick answers. How do you find people who have track? You ask them. On the New Jersey Board of Licensed Tree Experts has a website. You can find them through us at the Shade Tree Federation, because you will have that email address and phone number. And then you can find out your licensed tree experts through that, and then ask them about track. I don't think there is a place that TRAQ track is listed anywhere. And what's the minimum requirement for a DPW supervisor? Ours happens to be a certified arborist and just happens to be exceptionally competent. But you just have to ask, I'm afraid. I don't think that there's a requirement for a DPW supervisor to be a certified arborist or a licensed tree expert or anything else.
Right. I think we got extra lucky with that one in our municipality.
Yes.
But guidance on how to obtain those certifications and classes and such, is that something NJ Shade
Yeah, there's a
Tree
question there. How does someone get track? How do we get their qualification? I'm on the board of the New Jersey chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture, and we sponsor classes a couple of times a year, sometimes more, usually in Princeton. But you also need to have some prior qualifications to get that qualification. But as I said, I'll go into a little more detail about you don't have to have the qualification to use the common sense approach. It's really about systematic thinking, and if you can think through a problem, you can address the risk a tree presents just by using common sense, knowing a little about trees. I'll go into that in our next session or two.
Thank you, Neil. And thank you to James and to Christina for lending their time and their talents this morning to this presentation. We look forward to looking through the questions from today and some of the feedback and using that to really bring forward to session 2 and 3 and help walk you through this process from start to finish. So today we covered this tree removal and replacement requirement that will apply to all municipalities, the options that you have to comply with this requirement, and really highlighted there's a great deal of flexibility for you to comply. So thinking about what would be most beneficial to your township, how do you want to approach this? And we'll hope to give you some additional guidance to do that in sessions 2 and 3. So I want to again thank our panel very much for participating this morning. Thank you to all our attendees for taking time to be with us this morning and learn about this requirement. And we will be sending out the slide deck and then the registration information when it becomes available for session 2 to everyone who attended today. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.